Hey there. Yeah, so I know it's been a while since I've had an interview or video commentary. I've had a couple of blogs out there, and despite what, some of my haters, and I do have them apparently, uh, despite what some of them may say, it's not because no one wants to come on the show. I actually have five, six people who have wanted to. It's just our schedules, their campaign schedules, my campaign volunteer schedules, and my actual day job. It's been impossible. I mean, I hope to get some of them on. It's just, this weekend I got 100 doors to knock both days, and maybe helping with staffing a couple events and running 17 miles, hopefully catching up on sleep, cooking some meals, cleaning the apartment, and maybe even having a non-political social life. Yeah, right. Yeah, so TLDR, it's things are busy for everyone, so it's just kind of touch and go when people come on the show or not. I'm going to go in a totally different direction after the primary. Maybe some people will come back on if they have some things they want to say, but it's not really going to be the main focus of it all. Yeah, right now there's a lot on my mind, and so much that I've actually taken notes. I'm not reading from them. It's still going to be a natural flow of what's on my mind. It's just I want to make sure I don't forget anything. I'm going to talk about media narratives and economics and development and tendencies to misrepresent ideas and a lot of stuff in between. So, yeah, I'm going to be the first to admit that I'm guilty of the number one rule of millennial etiquette of not feeding the trolls. I feed trolls, and sometimes I am the troll that is fed. I actually had a blog about how sometimes trolling is fun. When I troll, though, usually it's just me saying something hyperbolic to see how people respond. I definitely avoid actually bullying someone. But recently, I think it's not an exaggeration to say I have been bullied. Certainly, some of my views and views of people I support have been misrepresented. We'll get to that. I've had a falling out with a fellow blogger, someone who I would used to disagree with, but also respect. We've had a falling out, and it seems like each other's style and thought processes are rather irreconcilable. That being said, I think it's necessary to raise the point that the local news media or blogosphere or whatever you want to call it seems to be falling into the same pattern as the national media establishment did in 2016 and really doing a hack job against progressives. Now, if you recall, in 2016, some progressive publications have brought to attention that the Washington Post, in particular, issued 16 different negative opinion pieces about Bernie Sanders in the span of like 4 hours. Look it up. It actually happened. It seems like a lot of Montgomery County specific media, be it Washington Post local section, Bethesda Beat, Seventh State, a number of others. I read them all. I agree with some of what they have to say. Some is more objective, some is less so. And to their credit, Seventh State, I like to read it. They disclose their own biases. I agree with them some of the time, sometimes I don't. But there has been a pattern. They seem to be falling into the same sort of tendency to really try as hard as they can to negatively portray progressives and more positively portray those who someone might call them a corporatist Democrat. I mean, most people are nominally Democrats in this kind of media establishment, but the attacks on progressives appear to be rather disproportionate. Now, an example of that, Seventh State had 4 or 5 postings in a row questioning whether or not Mark Elrich was a socialist, but there wasn't any coverage neither there or I think one piece in Bethesda Beat addressed this. The allegations against David Blair, one of them, or one set of them, being potential involvement in an insurance fraud case. And I'll admit I don't have the legal expertise to say whether the allegations are valid or not, but the fact is that's not really being talked about nearly as much as the kind of red baiting that has been going on. And certainly none of this blogosphere or local news reporting has covered an article that had surfaced that was from 2012, but in my opinion merits some investigation, at least into the candidate's qualifications or priorities as a county executive candidate, in which co-pays of some patients that were serviced by this PBM catalyst increased by 1,500% during the same time that then CEO David Blair's executive compensation had doubled. And he also spoke highly of industry consolidation and the company's profitability. This video isn't necessarily about that. I'm just saying that isn't something that's really being addressed in the media nearly as much as attacking the priorities or qualifications of the more progressive candidates. Now, another thing that I've noticed among this, I don't know if I want to call it, combination of local news reporting and blogosphere about Montgomery County's economic situation. There has been a lot of coverage about the SAGE policy report and Empower Montgomery's forum that followed it. A lot of gloom and doom outlook about basically our need to expand our tax base. And what I'm seeing is right-wing arguments being rehashed into more palatable talking points for Democrats. And basically a lot of these publications have said we need to grow our tax base by cutting taxes. That's called trickle-down economics. That doesn't work. There's also been arguments against the $15 minimum wage, saying that it's going to drive business out of the county, or new businesses are just not going to come here because that regulation just makes things too expensive for them. And then in the same breath they'll say, oh, we don't need to attract jobs that pay $15 an hour. We need to attract $30 an hour jobs or $60 an hour jobs. Okay, well, if that's the kind of company with the kind of jobs that you want to attract, why would that company be concerned about the minimum wage being too high? I'm just saying. And also what these kind of gloom and doom pieces have failed to address are other possible factors for business owners not setting up here. It's not simply about where the taxes are the lowest. It's also about quality of life. Maybe they find the traffic is too bad. Maybe they find just not suitable space or suitable market for them to set up. If it were always about which location had the lowest taxes, then, for example, Discovery wouldn't have left Silver Spring for New York. Or you just have Discovery or whatever have you business relocating to Kansas. That we don't necessarily see. So there's clearly more than one factor at play here. And also about regulation, I mean, what you hear is we're business hostile. We have too many regulations. We need to cut regulations. What really should be said is that we need someone who will do their homework and go through regulations that exist and reconsider, okay, well, maybe this regulation applies to this type of business, but not that type of business. Or this regulation is now obsolete. Or this requirement has evolved into a new requirement that is not being addressed. Or this regulation isn't being enforced enough. It's something really nuanced, and I realize that takes more time and resources to really figure out. But it seems like that approach would address more of the problem than simply let's cut regulations to just be more business friendly. What I do know is that we're not going to simply grow our tax base by cutting taxes. And I'll certainly revisit this topic, but it seems like this narrative is being spread across multiple publications to really be used as a scare tactic against specific candidates that I guess they just don't like. Another thing I want to address is this paradigm of growth. That's something that we're always hearing about: development and growth. Our growth is too slow, our growth is too fast. But the general consensus of this strain of media has been that basically growth is good. All growth is good. We should not question our desire for more growth. I mean, Greater Washington, I mean, basically that's just in their name. They're about, they're urbanists. They're about more dense development, and some of it makes a lot of sense. Others seem to be a bit too dogmatic, in my opinion. But it seems like growth doesn't necessarily... I think we're just approaching this in the wrong way. Growth does not need to be the goal. Instead, I think it's a reality, and our focus should be how we respond to that reality. So the question isn't, how do we grow more? It's, given that growth is happening, we don't want to stop it. We don't even want to limit it to, say, less than 1%. We have to figure out how we're going to keep pace, how we're going to respond to the growth with making sure our infrastructure is adequate, making sure that traffic isn't excessive. I mean, it is, but making sure schools aren't overcrowded, making sure that people that do live here, be it seniors, be it immigrants who are trying to make it, millennials like me who are early in their career, making sure that the influx of high-earning employees, say in biotech sector, or if we got Amazon, I mean, that would be great to have more six-figure jobs here and their employees living here, but to make sure that they don't drive prices up so people with less lucrative careers can't find their own places to live. All things really to take in consideration. Another thing I want to address is this tendency for these publications to throw out at anyone who questions excessive, or just anyone who questions the paradigm of growth always being good. They call them a NIMBY, which I think is inaccurate, because the connotation I get is literally not in my backyard. It's like, I have my space, I like it, you're encroaching on it, I don't want anything to change. Or, it can even have racial connotations. It seems to be something really negative, and I don't think it's accurate necessarily to use that term for anyone who not even opposes but just questions growth. And the questions that should be asked about it seem to be more, okay, well, let's not build something that's just going to replicate the same problem that we have or make it worse. I mean, I had just reiterated some of the problems with the traffic, school overcrowding that should be considered. It's something that, basically, to use the analogy, we want to make sure that it's a symbiotic relationship and not a cancer. And to really just think in terms of what our growth level is, and the greater it is, the better. It seems really myopic, and it's worth asking to me, why do we have this mentality that more is always better? And I understand why it's attractive. I think a lot of people, they're just competitive by nature. It's a little bit of tribalism, a little bit of pride. I mean, we want to compete to have the status of having the highest incomes, the more Fortune 500 companies, or the tallest buildings, or what have you. I think we should step back a bit and think of quality versus quantity. But that doesn't mean you don't want to attract innovation. Innovation is something I see as more qualitative. And I think a place where progressives, like left-wing economic progressives, and fiscal conservatives or libertarians may find common ground on is the role of the private sector in initiatives like environmental technology, because that serves a progressive purpose, also a role for profitability. It also fits within the capitalist system. I think that's a place where you find common ground, and it certainly would improve quality of surroundings. But I think that, at least in my experience, in order to really foster a creative mind, you do need to maintain a certain quality of your surrounding, and you need to be able to balance inspiring innovation with the byproducts of rampant consumerism. And that has a lot to do with why I didn't move to Northern Virginia. Yes, I do work in Northern Virginia, not because there are no jobs here. It just happened to be the company that hired me was the one that is a representative of whom was at a lecture that I went to and I networked at, and things worked out. It just so happens that that industry cluster is located in Northern Virginia, and I didn't want to live there because I didn't really like the quality of my surroundings when I'm visiting work. I mean, I honestly think the environmental impact of me commuting there and back is less than the total impact I would have because I would constantly be driving. In places like Tyson's Corner, I actually think that's a case against uncontrolled development, because it's basically just one giant highway. There's no green space. There's no walkable area. It's, I may be exaggerating, but it seems like just kind of cookie cutter townhouses or overpriced, sterile looking apartments that kind of all look alike, at least from the outside. It's a place where you can live in your overpriced apartment, drive your fancy car to the mall, spend money that you earned by working 12-hour shifts at your prestigious company. That's just kind of not the lifestyle I was really looking for. And so, to return back to economic development, a lot of the words that all the candidates for executive or council are using are job growth, business growth, and frankly, I'm very skeptical of the arbiter of what is healthy job growth is coming from an exclusive corporate background, because if this kind of exclusively corporate background is where you're coming from, the incentive is basically to grow your company. And it kind of feeds into the part of American dream style capitalism that I find to be dangerous. And I noticed that reflecting in the culture around the DC area. It's like people, they pride themselves in how many hours they've worked. I mean, yes, some people pride themselves in what they've accomplished in those hours, but it seems like the dialogue is, I am so busy, I have no time, I work so many hours, and it's less a complaint and more of a badge of honor, and I don't really think this is a good thing, because this kind of perversion of the American dream in the kind of capitalism that we have now, it really incentivizes an unhealthy lifestyle. And Forbes magazine, which is hardly a leftist publication, just did an article on how 47% of Americans did not use their vacation time or most of their vacation time last year. And it's not because they didn't have the vacation time, it's because, deadlines, or I have this project, I have too much to do for work, I'm gonna have to answer work emails. We're really incentivized to live this way. We're incentivized to not take our vacations, to work through weekends, to not sleep enough, to not take the time to exercise or fix yourself a nutritious meal. You can consciously try to make these decisions and make this happen, but that's not really what this kind of system really facilitates. And I would even go as far to say that we should reconsider how, the idea of the American dream, that hard work is rewarded. Now, I'm not going to go full Marxist on you and say I'm not of that economic persuasion where everyone should be paid equally regardless of what they contribute. No, that doesn't work. That's ridiculous. But I think we kind of have it backwards. Instead of those who perform, who contribute outstandingly, earning an outstanding standard of living, it's more, you have to do something outstanding to earn a decent standard of living. The purchasing power of just a mid-career job, when you contribute, you do your best during the time allotted, and I think that people work too many hours. That's a whole other thing. But the idea of just having multiple facets of your life and work being merely one of them, that doesn't buy you the same standard that it would 30 years ago. And this is just my perspective. I'm sure someone could tell me, well, I went into this industry and I work for this company and I actually work fewer than 40 hours and I can afford this, and that. Good on you. Please comment and tell me where you work and if they're hiring. But I think we tend to disincentivize balance as a whole. And I would even be interested in some kind of study that would measure the healthcare costs of this lifestyle versus the added economic value of this level of productivity. But then maybe that's the idea, at least in the healthcare industry, where they want you to work harder so you are more stressed out and get sick and buy more pharmaceuticals. And frankly, I don't think we need as our county executive someone from that industry. What do I know? Especially someone who doesn't operate at the level of people who are people upon whom this system is imposed. Is someone who operates at the glitzy top of it all, the person who benefits from it directly. So, this all being said, that doesn't mean that innovation shouldn't be rewarded. I just think we should step back and think of a way that there is some kind of incentive to have balance. And I know some companies do this, but it's just stepping back and thinking philosophically here. It's something worth thinking about. And, to say that someone who works kind of just enough, and again, not just saying they coast and just want to get by. I'm not talking about participation trophies here. I'm saying basically the level of career or the level at which people prioritize their career doesn't correspond to a similar standard of living as it would have. To afford a house with a yard and a car here, it's like you have to be in the rat race, you have to be killer, you have to make it all the way to the top, you need not just six figures, you need multiples of that. And I just think we've kind of lost control here. And this is why if I had to categorize myself into some kind of economic ideology, I'd rather not do that. I think I'm more post-capitalist than Marxist, certainly. I think the market economy, as it evolved into the mid-21st century, should be incorporating ideas like UBI, like democratized economics. And the reason being, from the perspective of, and full disclosure, a non-expert in this, I know that historically we've gone through periods of automation, or periods at which a new technology has made certain jobs obsolete. That has happened through all phases of industrialization. We've gone through boom and bust cycles. We've even gone through varying degrees of environmental impact of consumption and growth. But I don't see these byproducts of capitalism in this way just innovating themselves away. In fact, I actually see the negative aspects being compounded in ways that really need to be addressed through an evolution of this kind of system. And that point really segues sort of back to this election, a point that I recently tweeted out regarding how income inequality is compounded when you allow someone who's really wealthy to self-finance their own election. I stated something like, listen, I don't hate rich people. I've been accused of hating all rich people or just being bitter because I don't make as much money as other people, so I don't want them to make more money or have nicer things. No, if you earn what you have, if you are an honest and hardworking person and you earn a lot of money and you can buy yourself some nice things, that's great. You have a big house, that's wonderful. You have a nice car, you have a nice electric car, even better. And that's fine and good. Congratulations to you. But I don't think you should be able to buy yourself a nice public office. And that's what I meant by compounding the income inequality, because someone who's from one end of the economic spectrum has a disproportionate influence, whether it's their campaign contributions to someone who politically agrees with them and would legislate in ways that would further enrich them, or someone who goes in and automatically has this advantage when they're running their own campaign. It's also disadvantageous to normal people with whom that person might not really be in touch with. Or if you're making multiples of millions of dollars every year, what kind of empathy do you have with someone who's struggling to live on, let's say, $30,000 a year? I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying there's a lot more people who are making millions of dollars a year legislating for those who make $30,000 a year. And that's because of the way our campaign system is. And I've actually considered someday trying to get signatures for a ballot initiative, if this is even possible, to ban self-financing. And I know the first thing people will say is, well, that will just make people want to take even more from special interests. So we have the public financing option, and that's one step towards completely getting money out of politics. We have a lot of nonprofits and other organizations working to end this trend of taking money from corporate PACs. And then the last frontier on this is I see a way of having a check on people that just have their own money and want to use it to their advantage in the political system. I don't know if I'll ever go through that. Right now is untimely because it would, if Blair happened to win, it would look like me just throwing a temper tantrum about it. That's not the intention. It's just kind of further raised awareness that this is an inequality that is compounded. So really coming full circle to make this final statement is I admit my biases. Okay, I have my favorite candidate. I have my favorite candidates in other elections that we have. I've made that perfectly clear. And at the same time, I try not to be tribalistic, except in maybe a fun way. Like, for example, I've disclosed several times, I volunteer for Mark Elrich for county executive, and his staff and his volunteers and interns, they're like family. I feel like we're all just kind of on a similar wavelength about a lot of things. So, yeah, if they're a tribe, then sure, whatever, but it's not really about that. It's not my team versus yours and anything else besides the election. But what really bothers me this time around, or triggers, maybe I need a trigger warning, is misrepresenting other people's views. I try not to do that, but I've noticed other people doing that, and frankly, it really looks like just irresponsible journalism in this, and from people who otherwise seem really professional. It just seems irresponsible to find this gotcha quote from someone who you don't support and not at least follow up and say, well, what did you mean by that? It's like you found your gotcha quote and then you're just gonna run with it. And from these authors who, again, otherwise seem very professional, even highbrow in some regard, employing all kinds of logical fallacies when talking about this election. Like, you get false dilemmas when, for example, someone says, oh, well, there should be jobs in Frederick. That's not the same as saying there shouldn't be jobs in Montgomery County. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And then you get like these straw man arguments. So if you go back to talking about the NIMBYs, okay, you oppose this particular development plan. You oppose all kinds of development. You want to be regressive. That's also ridiculous. And of course, cherry picking certain gotcha sentences to incriminate someone. I mean, when you put all these things together, what you get, honestly, is fake news. But, not going in that direction now. But the last thing I'll say is progressives, at the risk of sounding tribalistic, my fellow progressives out there, if anything I said in this video resonates with you, you're probably progressive, more or less. I encourage people to consider candidates' statements at a deeper level, consider their long-term implications, and lots of times it will be uncomfortable to do. For a while I was thinking of this as the left-wing version of the red pill, but I'm not going to go there. I'll just call it the bitter pill. Sometimes a candidate may say something that doesn't sound sexy, or it may be entirely what you don't want to hear. But if someone is saying something uncomfortable like that, and still presumably wants to be elected, then there's probably a reason that they said it. And the reason is likely that they're onto something and could be right about something. And you might not be comfortable with that, and that's okay. That I think more thought and more mental energy really should be going into this, not just voting for the person that says what you want them, what they want you to hear. So I'm going to bed, and yeah, it's like, I don't even want to know what time it is right now. I'm getting up at 5. Like some people who pride themselves by how many hours they look, I pride myself in how many miles I run versus hours slept, and that's also not good. So do keep your eyes and ears out for more content leading up to the primary. Again, there might be an interview thrown in there if our schedules get lucky. We'll see what's up. I'll certainly have a lot more to say on this and on other topics, so keep watch for that. And for all the candidates who follow, whether I support you or not, good luck. And come the 27th, I'll see you on the other side.